All right, hi everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for coming at 6. My name is Gina, and I'd like to welcome you all to the University Bookstore. We're one of the oldest independent bookstores in the region. Today we're thrilled to host Nisi Shawl, Alberto Yañez, and E. Lily Yu. They're here to talk about their new compilation, New Suns, and it's all original speculative fiction by people of color. Nisi Shawl here is the editor, and the book showcases emerging and seasoned writers of many races, telling tales of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and their indefinable overlappings. These authors, are aware of our many possible pasts and futures, and we're hoping that this collection allowed them to kind of be freed of some stereotypes and clichés, so we'll get some interesting tales in there. A few words about tonight's authors. Nisi Shawl is a writer of science fiction and fantasy short stories, and she's also a journalist. She's the co-author with Cynthia Ward of Writing the Other, Bridging Cultural Differences for Successful Fiction. Her short stories have appeared in Asimov's science fiction magazine, Strange Horizons, and numerous other magazines and anthologies. And Alberto Yañez lives in Portland, Oregon. His work has appeared also in Strange Horizons, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Toasted Cake, and Podcastle. He's a graduate of Clarion West and was awarded a 2018 Oregon Literary Fellowship. Alberto went to Portland to become a registered nurse and has since learned more about people, bodily fluids, and himself than formerly anticipated. He draws on his Mexican and Jewish roots to inform the story featured in the book here, Burn the Ships. A native Californian, he misses easy sunshine, San Francisco, Chinese delivery, and other Mexicans.
It's true.
Our other author here today, E. Lily Yu, received the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer in 2012 and the Artist Trust LaSalle Storyteller Award in 2017. Her stories have appeared in McSweeney's, Boston Review, Fiction and Science Fiction, Clark's World, and Terraform, among others, as well as multiple Best of the Year anthologies, and she's been a finalist for the Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, Locust, and World Fantasy Awards. So the books over here, behind you on the table, you can purchase at the register. As I mentioned, the store will be closing tonight at 7, but we're free to stay as long as we'd like. And if you did park in the lot, come bug me or my coworker. We can get you parking validation. And so enough from me. Please help me welcome our authors for their readings tonight.
Thank you, Gina. I am Nisi, and I'm going to read something that I didn't write. This is a story by Kathleen Alcala, who actually sort of instigated this whole reading thing and then suddenly couldn't do it. So I'm going to read a part of her story called Deer Dancer. "Ha," she said, jiggling the wrench, "I've got you." The pipe came loose with a grating sound, and she reached in and unscrewed it the rest of the way. Rusty water dribbled out the end as she scuttled from under the house, waving the pipe section in the air. Brownish water spattered her shirt. It felt good. "Found it. It will be easy to fix," she said, wondering if they could find pipe the same diameter and long enough to repair the plumbing. This was the 5th house she had helped rehab, and Tater was beginning to think of herself as an expert in the undersides of houses. Shonda took the pipe from her and fingered the rusty hole. "How are you going to find the right size?" "We've got a whole pile from the other houses around here. One of them must have used the same size, maybe even the same plumber in the first place. All these houses were built around the same time." The sun, mother's sun, blazed down, and Tater pulled her hat forward from where it hung down her back on a string. "We'd better get home." It was 5 bells since first light, and unless they planned to spend the rest of the day under the house, they needed to get back. Walking Single file, Shonda took the lead, poking any suspicious-looking soil with her walking stick before proceeding. Tater carefully set her feet in Shonda's prints until they came to a place where the houses were lively with people preparing for midday siesta. Chia was just pulling protective burlap sacking over a patch of taters after digging up a few. The gray nubs did not look like much as they sat steaming on the ground, but washed and sliced into brilliant purple discs, they would glow. Tater's mom had named her after the naturalized Ozettes. Brought here from Peru by long-ago voyagers, the potatoes had taken to the Northwest like, well, no other plant or animal. Tater was proud of her unusual name and secretly hoped she was like them. Ordinary at first to look, but gem-like on the inside, rooted. Tater was still carrying the pipe. "What you gonna do with that?" asked Chia. "Match it, then recycle. The rest of the pipes held up good. This one is far enough gone. Reuse might be able to smash it into dust for the iron." Tater splashed some water on her neck and hung up her hat. Out of the sun now, she rolled up her sleeves and served herself soup she found cooling on the stove. Chia would stay up cooking so that the day crew would have something to eat when they woke from their midday slumbers around sundown. Nights worked second shift. It used to be called graveyard shift, but that made too many people sad. What to think when the sun goes down and every light takes on spectral aspect. My eyes, ever deceitful, ever necessary for one who relies on visual cues, who only trusts the stimuli she takes in through the range of light and motion. The angular bounce of light at the solstice, of sun streaming directly into our eyes as though to make up for all those days when we see no sun at all. How can our limbs loosen and we tilt back our heads with a slight smile, drinking it in? Who can deny the intoxication of sunlight, the touch of gold as it runs down our arms from our fingertips? Our thighs grow slack as our lips part to drink in the pearly heat. Our pens rest on their tables as our minds glide away from the task at hand. Tater read a page from her aunt's diary, then set it aside. She had been given it years before, but had not tried to read it until being assigned to housing rehab. She found it hard to sleep out here on the edges. Reading the old diary helped. She loved imagining what it was like before, when the sun was scarce. Tater liked stroking the soft edges. It was the only book she owned herself, and she found herself fingering the pages like worry beads. Tater lay back carefully in her hammock so as not to flip over, afraid of and grateful for the distance from the floor. Not that rats wouldn't jump or climb up onto the hammock if they felt like it, but Tater still felt better this way. Now she tried to imagine Aunt Cece's life when water stayed in its place and the sun was a welcome embrace against the damp cold. She could barely remember being cold. "Not sleeping?" asked Shonda as she came in. "Not yet." Shonda unhooked her own hammock from where it hung coiled on the wall and took it outside. She preferred to sleep under the giant Doug fir that sheltered their house, a tree they had defended with guns and clubs early on. Tater could smell the taters cooking. There was an herb with them, something she could not quite place as she drifted off to sleep. Late afternoons were for domestic chores. That included upkeep on the house where they homesteaded. If they could defend it for 7 years, the house was theirs. Most people stayed on wait lists until a house opened up in the center, but that could take forever. Homesteading on the edges offered larger properties, enough to grow food, and also dangers. But even for the edges, there were wait lists of people stacked sky high in mass housing. Tater barely remembered before, and there were some things in between that she couldn't think about at all. Shonda gently shook Tater awake. It felt as though she had just dozed off, a dream of deer picking their way across a clearing, fading gently from her mind. Your turn to wash. Tater dragged herself back to the waking world. She might have been having a true dream. But if that's what it was, it would come back. She would need to let the others know if it did. When she was a child of 8, it became clear that Tater got the true dreaming. When she was 14, she was given her aunt's journal. Cece was an original dreamer, born in Mexico, raised in the U.S. in secrecy by her family, given every advantage to learn the language, the ways of these people, so that she could rescue the rest of her family from the label, them. Everyone in Cece's family, including Tater's mom, worked every waking moment to keep Cece, the youngest, in school and living long enough to pull her family through the tortuous knots of the legal system. She succeeded, and her nieces and nephews became U.S. as well. But that was all before. Dream. Salal, salal, thimbleberry, grass. Smell of humans, water, stillness, stillness. Light slanting in for longer days. Humans took their cues from the animals and had become diurnal. Afternoons were for chores, but night was for guarding. Second shift got up and had breakfast with the day shift's dinner. Tater could spot nights on sight. Like her, they had a dreamy look, with large eyes and slightly larger nostrils. There was a lot of talk about whether this was adaptation after so few generations, or just an affinity of nights for nights as partners, since that's who they got to know anyway. Every household had a combination of days and nights. Tater joined the table next to Anna, one of the few nights she spoke to regularly. So, not too much, just talking about the bears spotted at the north end. Again, they've no fright. Sorrel's pretty sure she heard them talking again. You mean like people talk? Yeah, she swears she can almost understand them. Sorrel was at the other end of the table describing the bear sighting. She stood up and lumbered down the length of the table, stopping to smell each of their plates, setting them laughing. Are the bears changing, or is it just you? Someone called out. Sorrel took her seat. They were eating eggs tonight, gathered from the summer chickens. Could just be me, she said honestly. I've got so I can smell people coming, even tell sometimes who it is. Sorrel flexed her powerful hands and set to her meal. Tater and me are going to need a full crew tomorrow, said Shonda. 5 people. Time to replace the roof on the Denny Way house so we can start on the inside. Plumbing's almost done. Tater's fast. Who will you work with next? Asked Anna. Tater blushed and looked down. Not for me to say. All in good time, said Chia, as she began to clear the table. She might have other dons she wants to develop. Tater thought about that. Sometimes she forgot that she could choose what she wanted to work on, who she wanted to work with, as long as it was for the common good. It hadn't been like that before, or even for a long while after. Again, she had the strong feeling of the deer in the ravine nearby, and when she looked up, Sorrel had stopped eating and was staring down the table at her, still and alert. Tater pushed out her chair and stood up. I've got to dream now, she said. Shonda pointed at Anna and Chia, who flanked Tater and escorted her out of the kitchen. I'll stop there.
Burn the ships. There are no obsidian blades in the camp. The Dawncomer guards have learned enough to make sure that no ritual knives get smuggled in. Without obsidian, Gineltok can't spill blood properly. He can't keep the law, can't observe the rites of the living Lord as a man of God must. The ghost-colored invaders who came from beyond the rising sun trust in their vigilance and in their cold technology to protect them. It does. The people make do. They've had to for over a decade now, ever since the Dawncomers laid aside any pretense of friendliness and openly usurped the Emperor's power. But then there is always the Lord. Ginelpa keeps faith. It'll be enough. Surely. But tonight, need drives him, as relentless as a snake driver's whip. He sneaks into a tight corner between the latrines, hidden from the sight of the guards. The stench of watery shit and piss is thick despite the cold, dry winter night. It's long after curfew, and he'll be shot on sight. But Ginelpa is alone for the first time in months. In an overcrowded hell, solitude itself is almost worth the risk. The wind picks up and moves the clouds over the blue-black sky, revealing stars glinting like frozen tears on the bruised face of night. The waning quarter moon gives little light, and Ginelpa shivers as he contemplates the dark between the stars. His copper-brown skin, sallow from poor rations and exhaustion, tightens and prickles as he shivers. The Tzitzinime dwell in the vast emptiness. He doesn't precisely fear the dark goddesses, orthodox man that he is. God's sisters made willing sacrifices, he reminds himself. The bone women gave their lives for the living Lord, for his law. The law itself keeps the people safe, and he keeps the law. Their blood, their flesh, to nourish him. The gray hair on the back of his neck stands up. He tells himself it's the biting wind that makes him feel small and naked under the pitiless stars. Ginelpa steals his faith and straightens his back, ignores the cold, and starts to softly chant the bloodletting prayers. He takes a shard of bone out of the pocket of his thin gray pants. Carefully, he doesn't think about from whom that bone came, and focuses on the prayers he uttered as he honed the shards a point, wedded on hope and dismay. He shivers again, harder, shudders, and pulls the sleeve of his dirty smock back, slicing the flesh of his left forearm. The red blood is black in the shadowed starlight. He should call out, proud, happy at an offering given, voice ringing like a bronze temple bell to proclaim his bloodletting, but the guards would hear him. After a long moment trembling in the cold, Ginelpa is able to focus. The year's count is ending soon, and with the power of time turning behind his prayers, Ginelpa hopes that the Lord will listen despite the lack of incense and obsidian. Maybe provide a different answer. The wind dies down, and Ginelpa hears nothing beyond himself and the blood surf, deafening in his ears. The pounding of each heartbeat, one more note in a space where experience and grace have taught him to expect to hear the voice of God. But silence. But even with no incense to carry his pleas, surely God will hear him? Answer, he thinks deep inside himself, and then stifles the demand. Ever since he was newly a man and became the youngest law speaker of the people of the Starry Codex, the voice of God has answered him at prayers. More than 40 years. Now, with the scent of misery the only incense, Ginelpa dreads the reply. Silence. But exhorting the Lord is difficult, but hopelessness is harder. Ginelpa prays, silent words shaping his cracked lips in curves of agony and devotion. But he lets out a mangled cry, barely remembering to stifle his despair with his dirty, chapped hands. A dog barks on the other side of the camp. The law speaker, who had been called to walk before the living Lord, falls to his knees in the icy muck. In fragmented silence between heartbeats, Ginelpa hears a small, still voice, giving him the answer he has heard before. Guide the people to me, Ginelpa. Help them be willing. I am so hungry. Nourish me. But No. Citlal has heard that word from her husband more times in the last week of arguments than the nearly 40 years spent together before it. She can tell that the argument feels ancient, endless to the both of them. What other choice do we have? Citlal demands. Her voice is thick with stowed rage, driving like a fire axolotl in her guts, with the tears that she's refused to shed since she watched the Dawncomers guard shoot their daughter Shochi 4 months ago. Her dark eyes are dry and her prematurely lined brown face. 3 decades since the massive invasion fleet turned their world inside out on a fine spring dawn. The new sun had come huge and red, staining the sky, the sunrise gate opening from an old, strange world. The empire of the land between the waters had grown accustomed to the almost random trickle of small refugee boats over the previous century, their half-drowned sailors bedraggled like mangy golden rats fleeing chaos from an unfathomable somewhere behind the sunrise. The dawncomers had been just pale, yellow-haired jetsam on the eastern shores, easily welcome curiosities. But then they came in larger, blazing ships teeming with their survivors, unwelcome arrivals with guns and plague and their foreign god, slowly taking over everything. Cynthia has lost almost everyone she's cared for in a long and fortunate life, except her husband, her godly man who refuses to understand what must be done. They're in one of the warehouses the dawncomers used to keep up the pretense that these are work camps. The other captives ignore the whispered argument out of respect and familiarity. The scent of old boots and cloaks stripped off at gunpoint makes the chilly air musty as the stolen goods move down the conveyor belt with typical dawncomer efficiency. The usurpers brought old mechanical technology with them, and it was impervious to the living magics the people used. Their casual illnesses had killed multitudes throughout the empire, hitting mage bloods the worst, eviscerating the effectiveness of the people's priests and magicians. Centuries of order toppled, the emperor's power turned into empty ceremony and yay-saying. So, we just wait for God to save us? Cynthia is so beyond frustration with her husband that it's hard work to remember anything but her anger. How long do we cling to prayer? Do we just wait for God to kill the newcomers, the dawncomers? We could act. And if we were to do it, if we were to commit that sin, what will we be? Alive. Kinelthok closes his eyes. Cynthia's point is sharp, like all the cactus spine reasoning of her arguments across their lives. As sharp and as relentless as her anger is, she knows that he argues reasons, truths, that he hopes she'll accept. She fights the urge to count them off on her fingers as he repeats himself, his tone a perfectly logical hammer to nap away the flint of her resolve. The face of the living Lord would turn from us. The sunset gate would be closed shut to everyone we would save. No reunion with our people in the next world beyond the west. The Tsitsimima would eat our souls. And probably make dresses out of our bones too, she retorts. Childhood stories made truths made glib and fierce by the effort not to yell. Kinelthok stops sorting dead women's shoes for a moment, breathing hard at her. As a wise wife of the people, Cynthia knows the laws that bind magic since the living Lord rose. She understands the way order limits chaos, like the stars fixing the dark sky. She knows, bone true, the reasons that forbid the action she urges. Invoking the dead sisters is dangerous, especially with the Temple Major, the place where the divine presence of utter night could safely touch mortal earth, now rubble under dawncomer boots. Kinelthok sighs and enunciates clearly at her, as if to a foreigner. Every one of us lost. What good is salvation if the spirit of the people is dead, Kinelthok, she counters. She sorts a feathered green hat out of the hodgepodge, twiggy fingers nimble but aching in the cold. They captured every single mage blood on orders from the Hierophant. The Lord saved us before. We need to trust and obey. His earnestness is painful. It reminds her of the kind young man who won her heart with marigolds and poetry during the first years of their marriage. Kinelthok, it isn't dead refugees begging for sanctuary. She repeats her own list of inarguable facts. All of the dawncomers have come now, and they're tired of us living in their new home. They burned all their ships. They can't go back through the sunrise gate, and there's only room for themselves in their vision of the world. Cynthia spits the words out like cactus gall. And God doesn't care. Of course he does, but it's not for us to decide how he shows it. We made a pact. He gave men magic, and we swore that we were his. If the Lord chooses that we die here, we'll sing hymns to his light as we do it. Cynthia knows that her husband's faith is straight and true. He's heard the voice of God. He knows what certainty is. Doubt is new and grown bitterly familiar. It's ash, she thinks. Black ash falling from the sky on the days when the people's corpses are burnt. Ash on her tongue that God says nothing to her husband now. We can only do it during the dead days, Kineltok. Andir comes in 2 days, and we won't last another year. If you help, all the people will rise up. She takes a breath, and then she whispers, "Please." He purses his lips so tightly together that they almost disappear, and he looks away, pretending absorption in sorting stolen shoes. Zitlal counts to 5, and 5 again, and exhales. Her anger settles, like a pot of chocolate moved off, but still near the flame. She continues, admitting to her radical magic. "I used women's blood and the night wind to speak to the wise wives in the other camps and reservations. There are so few of us left," she continues. "The Dawncomers are planning another purge in 3 days through all of the camps. They won't burn the bodies for at least a few days after that. They dole out misery to feed their own god. Damn them. I think they're offering us as a sacrifice, but we can appeal to the tzitze." He shakes his head no. Gray hair, straggly storm about his head. "Zitlal, no. The other law speakers in the camp agree with me." She snorts and throws a fine turquoise spider silk shawl into the sorting bin. "You mean none of them dare disagree with the great law speaker Kineltok? We will all die." She pauses, deliberate. "They killed Shochi. And if they are feeding us to their god, do any of our souls even make it past the sunset gate into the next world?" He throws out his hands, negating the possibility. "Shochi is in God's keeping," he says, almost reasonable. Then his voice hardens. "And I refuse to be the one who keeps us apart for eternity." Zitlal's shoulders slump and her head dips, lank black hair streaked with silver white obscuring her face. She knows that tone in her husband's voice. He won't countenance the magic that could save them, not if it embraces the dark between the stars. She reminds herself that he's a good man, a godly man. The living Lord has spoken with him. The people use his name as another word for rectitude, for devotion, for wisdom. She reminds herself. A good man who only sees God. She will not be so blind. There are 5 dead days between Andir on the night of the Festival of Gates and the start of the new year. 5 days when the doors between the worlds of the living and the dead are open, and the skeletal dead sisters of the living Lord stride unhindered across the living world. Then, with the sunrise start of the day of new fire, God sets the divine glyph on the list of the living and the dead after making the year's bargain with his sisters, and shuts the gates. One of the prayers the people sing to guard them in the dark tells of the grim and beautiful bat-winged obsidian butterfly, the Lady of the Knife, eldest of his sisters. She is set to mark down all the living and list, as God so decides, and the Tzitsamime agree, the deaths in the coming year. Who by fire? Who by water? Who by old age? They are the living Lord's people, praying and keeping God's laws with the mage bloods to guide them. Who by falling? Who by plague? Zitlal has never liked that prayer. She doesn't find comfort in its cosmic certainty. The people have kept the laws as best they can, watching the Dawncomers abandon slyness and rise to real power over the last decade. There, the strangers now, forbidden to rebuild the great pyramid temple major in the heart of the old capital. Still, the people have adapted. Who by strangulation? Who by thirst? Who by willing sacrifice? Kineltok hid his face when the guards shot their daughter Shochi and murmured the prayer recited upon receiving news of a death in the stillness after the gunshot. Blessed be the living Lord, the keeper of life. The guards tossed their daughter's body on a pile with others, grandmothers, the gold stolen for their teeth to make wire for the machines, children, stomachs distended and arms stick-like with hunger, lame men who could not work fast enough, bludgeoned to death with rifle butts. A daughter, beloved, who by gunshot, she whispers, adding a new death to the ancient litany. She will never forgive Kineltok for looking away. How are we on time?
Fine.
All right, so I will end there because the next chapter goes on, or next section goes on a little too long. But thank you.
Thank you all for coming out on a weeknight. Is this audible in back?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
3 variations on a theme of imperial attire.
They never tell the story right. The Danish must have their heavens and happy endings, and Andersen's tales are meant for children. We, however, you and I, know that people are people, and every one of us capable of... But the story. Once there was a vain and foolish emperor who made up for his foolishness by a kind of low cunning. As such rulers do, he drew to himself a retinue of like men and women who told him he was wise and humble, generous and good. The emperor would smile at their flattery, which in his wisdom he knew to be the truth, and lavish gold and gems and deeds upon them. Thus was everyone contented within the palace walls, and those outside got on as well as they could. Eventually, with narrative inevitability, 2 men with knapsacks and pockets full of thread came knocking at the palace gates. "We are tailors," the first one said, "wise but humble tailors, who seek to offer our boutique services to men of might, such as yourself." "Here is a list of our bona fides," said the second man, "sterling references, one and all." "The very best, I'm sure," the emperor said, looking at the ruby buttons on their vests of gilt brocade. "What we'd like to offer you is an exclusive deal, the latest in fashion, which no one else owns, designed in collaboration with a distant country's military-industrial complex. Top secret and cutting edge. The loyalty distinguisher line of couture." "What a mouthful," the emperor said, looking askance. "Call it something I can pronounce." "What a brilliant suggestion. The thresher, how's that, since it sorts the wheat from the worthless chaff?" "Powerful," the emperor said. "I like it. Now, the key selling point of the thresher line, what a wonderful name, is that it'll let you sort at a glance your loyal, meritorious, and worthy subjects from, well, the useless ones. At a glance, eh? Indeed, when we dress you in thresher fabric, cut to the height of style, those subjects of noble character will see you as you truly are, with all your hidden virtues displayed. They'll swoon at your intellect, marvel at your power, gape at your discernment and understanding. You'll know them by their raptures and fits of joy. Then you can place them in positions of authority, judging village disputes and distributing grain, for example, or tax collecting." "Good," the emperor said, rubbing his chin. "And the rest?" "The thresher fabric will reflect their true ugliness. They will pale and shrink back and avert their eyes. They will scream and faint. They will whimper at the sight of their deepest selves. And thus you will know your traitorous subjects. Hard labor would be too good for them." "Make me the suit at once," the emperor said, and his court, whispering amongst themselves, wondered how the marvel would be managed. Well, you know how. The tailors place loud orders on the phone for Italian leather and French wool, Japanese silks and bulletproof thread, had conspicuously large boxes airlifted to their quarters, and all day and all night they cut and sewed the air with an industry that was inspiring to see. The appointed day came, red and hot. Crows rattled in the palace trees. In the emperor's chamber before the cheval glass, the tailors presented their work with pride. "Our finest piece, a triumph, a breakthrough in fashion. But let us see what it looks like on you. Habeas corpus is the haberdasher's true test." The emperor looked at their empty hands, swallowed, scowled, thought, and said, "Bravo! Is the jacket not to your liking? Yes, the pants are a little long. I'll fix that in a minute, never you worry. There, how's that?" "Perfect," the emperor said, gazing at his reflection. "Now you must show it to your subjects. Your courtiers have assembled and are waiting." When the emperor strode into his court, a ruby-buttoned tailor at each elbow, his courtiers stared. Then one, then another, hastily applauded, and the stamping and cheering shook the walls. A little color came back into the emperor's cheeks, and he ruffed through his blonde whiskers in relief, though what terrible worry he had been relieved of, no one watching could say. "You chose your court wisely," the tailor said. "Now ride throughout your kingdom and sift the wicked from the good." And the emperor, glancing dubiously at the saddle, mounted his horse and rode through the city streets. His stomach billowed with every bounce. Before him rode his courtiers, shouting the people forth to praise the craftsmanship and glory of these new clothes, which would divide the loyal from the perfidious. The people, who had not survived 6 decades of imperial whims and 7 prohibitions on various fruits, fats, and hats without acquiring a certain degree of sense, observed the wind's direction and vociferously admired the blinding gleam of the cloth of gold, the shimmer of silks, the cut and fit of everything. Children, however, who through lack of life experience have not yet learned the salubrious lessons of unjust pain, while quite disposed to lie to avoid immediate punishment, are also inclined to speak inconvenient truths at the most inconvenient times. Ma, the emperor's naked. No, he's not. He's wearing the finest suit that I ever did see. Ma, I can see his dick. At this,
Microphone, right?
At this, the good wife clapped her aproned hand over her son's mouth, but it was too late. The emperor had heard. He turned a pitying eye upon them as their neighbors immediately began to point and hiss. Why, they'd always known, an absent father, single motherhood stirred up evil, that's what they'd always said. But the emperor's getup was magnificent, truly unparalleled. Only a stupid blind woman couldn't see that. The emperor nudged his horse with his knees and serenely continued upon his way. In the morning, the boy and his mother were gone. Their little stone and thatch cottage had burned to the ground. Their neighbors and their houses had vanished as well. Only a few cracked teeth and a fistful of phalanges were found. The emperor retained the tailors on an exclusive contract at astronomical rates and took to riding out among his people on a weekly basis, since it was now clear that there was treachery in the land. People fell over themselves to report their parents, in-laws, rivals, classmates, colleagues, never failing to praise the newest suit of clothes themselves, until the streets turned black with blood and soot. When the emperor was finally stricken with a fatal case of pneumonia, which happened far later than one might imagine, because he was a corpulent and well-insulated man, his former subjects, one after the other, dazed by the news, picked up the phone by habit to denounce their friends, and heard, on the other end, the dusty silence of a dead body. Unnecessarily grim, you say, unrealistic. Scenes this bloody no longer occur in the civilized world. I agree with all your criticisms, most erudite of readers. There's nothing for it but to try again. Here, then, is a more charming tale, one that will better suit your taste. Once there was a body politic that, through a happy geographic accident, had avoided any number of devastating wars and was thus left the most powerful government in the world. On the basis of that evidence, it thought itself the most enlightened body politic that the world had ever seen. It kept its citizens under surveillance, arresting or ejecting those who did not agree, and as a result enjoyed unanimous approbation. One day, two men, sons of the vast clothing empire, who had recently been elected to the body, presented a sheaf of invisible bills. See how stylishly we've cut, trimmed, and hemmed taxes. How popular you'll be with the tastemakers of this realm. How perceptive and attractive you'll seem if you pass them. See how they funnel the vast majority of money to the military, which is always fashionable. How powerful you'll look to your enemies. Look how your children will benefit, leapfrogging into elite universities, flourishing in the compost of your trusts and estates. All honorable members of this body politic will see the good, glorious vision these bills represent. All citizens of discernment shall agree. The others? Well, they're not citizens, or they're fake citizens, voting without proper identification, and we should divert a portion of our security budget to uncovering these traitors and deporting or imprisoning them, as our fathers did in their day. The platforms and proposals were trotted before the country with pleasing pomp and ceremony. The true citizens applauded them so loudly you couldn't think, and trained militias to hunt down the fake citizens, and rammed cars into the bodies of fake citizens, and phoned in denunciations of their neighbors, ex-lovers, grandchildren, pets. And before too long, the streets ran black and red with... That didn't go too well, did it? Heavy-handed, on the nose, it's hardly even a story. The artistic error was choosing a plurality as a subject. It's difficult to create complexity of character complete with inner conflicts and landscapes and unique worldviews when one's protagonist is an amorphous group, especially when the members are as slippery as politicians. So a character study is what's needed, it seems. Once there were two tailored, you know what, you're right, we don't need both of them. They're hardly distinguishable as it is. Anderson might have wished to signify the multitudinousness of such men or illustrate how well they work together once they recognize each other, but we can take that for granted as something the reader already knows. Once there was a man who called himself whatever was suitable to his purposes at the time. If it profited him to say he was a soldier, then he was a soldier who had served the distinction. If it furthered his aims to call himself beloved, then someone's sweetheart he was. By speaking the words that another person wished to hear, whether those words were flattery or promises or blame, he could insinuate himself into most others' trust. He had few talents besides this one, and a loathing for honest work besides, but this one talent proved enough to feed and clothe him until such time that the trick was plain. By then, of course, the man was long gone. He fed at first on the labor of farmers, progressing at length to literate merchants and clerks. Over and over, his living proved to him the moral by which he compassed his world, that the slow and stupid existed to be ruled and robbed by cleverer and better men than they. But the smell of damp wool and the low burr of laborers came to displease him. The damp, wormy odors of ancient books soon bored him. In short, there are only so many times a bright man of tremendous worth can fleece the same kind of idiot. The reward is small, but doubly tedious. One must establish trust, perform small favors, establish rapport and commonalities, and so on and so forth, and that routine grows repetitive. The man longed to leave a mark on the face of history, as a result of which he could no longer be ignored. And to do that, one must be proximate to greatness. So the man who would call himself anything stashed away the profits of his cleverness until he could move to the Valley of Kings and Queens, where starry fortunes were built upon a vastness of sand. Like pharaohs, these men and women lived, erecting monuments and pressing whole hosts into hard labor, and word of their power and wealth had come to his ears. The man bid farewell to the women who all thought themselves his one and only love, with haste and without many tears, since he did not expect to see them again. He did not kiss the infant boy that one held, with his own dark hair and dimpled cheeks. Time and space did not chain our storyteller, for the stories he told disregarded both as soon as they became inconvenient. And so, by steamer and coach, greyhound and plane, the man made his way to the Valley of Sand. And where money flows and ebbs in deep tides like the sea, shifting mountains, crashing, storming, drowning, the humblest barnacle is sufficiently wetted if it only clings to a firm surface. So the man lived, studying the landscape, until he heard the clack of dice and every 2 shells rolled along by the sea. With adjustments to his former patterns, he crabbed small fortunes with the wire cage of his smile and landed wish-granting carp with his tongue forbaked. A little empire he eked out, nestling against the greater fortunes and powers that ironed the land flat, and facing a neighborhood there, shredding communities there. From the kings of that land, he learned to spin his silken webs to catch not one fly, but 1,000. Once stuck in his flatteries, they squirmed to be sucked, pleading to be wrapped in his glorious silks. And he, like a spider, was glad to oblige. Dining on every rare delicacy, traveling to white-dusted parties by limo and helicopter, he was contented for a time. Then, as he listened, as he grew familiar with that land, he learned that these kings were clever but lesser, that an emperor ruled over them, and that this emperor was a fool. The kings simpered and groveled when they came before the emperor, just as this man did before them. Bit by bit, the glitter of the Valley of Kings faded. The man grew restless and hungry once more. Late at night, he spun plans to weave himself into the imperial court and staff. Favors were asked here, a rumor murmured there. Soon an invitation on cream thick paper made its way into his hand. All was ready, the story staged, waiting only for the curtain and lights. On the morning the man walked out of his old apartment for the last time, a plane ticket clutched in one hand, he found a boy no older than 15, dressed in the clothes of another era, standing in the building's entryway. "Excuse me," the man said, stepping around the boy. "You're my father," the boy said. "I don't have a son. Here's a picture of us. That could be anyone. It's you. I didn't come to bother you. I only wanted to ask. You're making me late. Why you left. Why we weren't enough for you. Nothing personal, nothing to do with you, but look at your mother. Was I supposed to grow old with that? In that small, rowdy house, in that backwater of a time and place? No, I am meant for greater things. She said you were a tailor. I do stitch, weave, and spin. Will you teach me to be a tailor too? In 10 minutes, I'm going to miss my flight, which will cause me to miss a very important appointment. See, I'm on a tight schedule. Call me another time." "But," the boy said, looking after him, I don't have your number." "So sorry, your imperial grandiloquence," the man said several hours later, "encountered an unavoidable delay. But now that I'm here, my various skills as a tailor are at your praiseworthy self's disposal. I can sew you an outfit, invisible, that all your subjects must nonetheless kiss the hems of and admire. Sew half-truths and falsehoods together until a listener can't tell head from tail. Weave tales to turn brother against brother, snipping all bonds of loyalty except to you. These matters make my trade. Be welcome here," the emperor said. "I can tell that you are a gifted man." The emperor threw a fistful of peas at him. "Quick, a suit that will make me irresistible. I need it in 5 minutes. The Queen of Sheba is coming." "Immediately," the tailor said. But when the tailor returned after 4 minutes, carrying a suit of exaggerations, the emperor was already pawing at the queen, who resisted with an expression of deep distaste, extracted herself, and stormed off. "Where were you?" the emperor said, mashing a handful of gravy into the tailor's hair. "I told you to be done in 2 minutes. You took 10. The tailor said, "That's right, O golden son of wisdom. I didn't get a fucker because of you." To make amendments for your disappointment, may I offer you this suit of impregnable armor? And he held out again the invisible clothes that, mere minutes before, had been irresistible suit. Don't be stupid, I can't get pregnant. But this suit protects you from all harm. Gimme, the Emperor said, and was quickly dressed. Even though his wares were intangible, producing enough of them to please the Emperor and thus avoid the latest flung dish of baked beans proved exhausting for the soi-disant tailor. He spun the three-piece of plausible denial, the vest and cravat of high-event attendance, the cufflinks of venality. Each time, the Emperor toyed with his work, tried it on, pronounced himself satisfied, and promptly forgot it existed. May I suggest, the depleted tailor said, stripping the populace of their rights, so that no one has rights but the most righteous of all, which is to say you, our rightness, you who are never wrong. Why not? The Emperor said. That was carried out despite demonstrations and strikes and scathing newspaper columns, and then the tailor had to invent a new diversion. What about setting neighbor against neighbor and stranger against stranger? Tell the old story of the dark-skinned foreigner with his knife dripping blood. A little chaos does for power what warm horseshit does for weeds. Whatever you like, said the triply cloaked Emperor. Next. And those foreign-born or born to foreigners or born to those born to foreigners were rounded up, accused of crimes, and variously punished. May I suggest plucking the flower of youth before it grows strong enough to revolt? Let it be so, the Emperor said. Across the realm, children were mown down like green grass ahead of the mower's side. Even the onion-eyed kings in their silicon towers felt their courts' hearts crack and said, no more. But they spoke it softly, so the Emperor would not hear. And while the tailor measured and spun and snipped, the murmur of the people rose to a roar. For there remained some of intelligence and clear thinking and good judgment among them, and these had gently talked to the rest to put on new eyes and see. On a day when the Emperor was deliberating between the empty suit of universal belovedness on the tailor's left arm and the trousers and blazer of religious authority draped over his right, a herald ran in with a report that a mob had smashed through the palace gates and was headed toward the Emperor's palace. Indeed, through the window they could see a dark storm of humanity swelling on the horizon. All that stood between the flood and the doors was a line of police with loaded rifles. Most of the mob was children, with some old women mixed in, and some young, as well as a few brave men. And they stepped over the bodies of those who were shot and pressed forward to the palace, inevitable as death. The tailor, with the instinct of a hare, twitched and backed toward the exit. The Emperor said, "Sit," and the tailor sat. At a snap of the Emperor's fingers, servants tugged the curtains shut so that they could no longer see the cresting wave. The lights were switched off. "Bring me a bottle," the Emperor said, and poured 2 fingers of 60-year-old liquor into 2 glasses. One he drank, one he emptied over the tailor. "That suit," the Emperor said, "that prevents all harm, I'm wearing it now. But what will you do, clever tailor, when they come through those doors?" Distantly, over the gunfire, they could hear the children singing, and the song rose sweet and clear on the wind. Soon there began, at the palace doors, a heavy and fateful thudding, like that of a heart under terrible strain. All the world, it seemed, kind and cruel alike, had come to beat down the palace doors. If you'll excuse me, I am now going to join them. Heaven help the children. Heaven help us all. Thank you.
So we have a few more minutes if you have questions.
Tomatoes.
So, Nisi, how did you round them all up? What was your ask for this anthology?
I asked for their best. Right? Isn't that what I said? I said I wanted, yeah, I wanted your most thrilling and involving and gorgeous work.
Did we deliver?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take from asking until you finally were able to put this together?
Like maybe 18 months, something like
Okay.
that.
That's not bad
Yeah.
for all original work.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, some of the stuff was written after the ask and some was written before it.
Yeah.
So,
And how did you decide to order the stories in the
that was actually pretty hard. I knew that I wanted Toby Backel's story first because I thought it was a good way to get people into the space of the storytelling. It's about someone who comes to Earth as a tourist. And I wanted to end with Darcy Little Badgers because it had this sort of questioning open-endedness at the end, sort of a hopeful note. There was that. I don't know.
Just to note that if anyone still wants to buy a book, we've got about 2 minutes before the register's closed, we'll still be here.
I saw the quote from Octavia that opens the anthology, but I was sort of wondering, you know, whether like the timing or what were all the factors that came together that you decided like this is the topic I want and this is what I want to do it.
Well, I was actually asked to do this anthology by Solaris, by someone who's not actually there anymore. I don't know, maybe you guys could talk about why you wrote what you wrote.
Well, this piece actually originated when I was at Clarion West ages and ages ago, and that first iteration was a pretty bare bones thing that got more and more complex as I went back to revise and add all the layers that needed to go in. And I wrote it because it is
University bookstore is now closed. Please bring your final collection to the register.
so
Thank you for coming with us and have a good evening.
my academic background, my original academic background is in religious studies, and one of the things that I've always found particularly fascinating and compelling in that is our responses in the face of horror, because life gives us a lot of horror in our history, we know that. And what we do when we are faced with the absence of God, and what's more, what we do if we are people of faith when we have the presence of God, and how we can respond to that. So pondering that question just led to this story, and here we are.
Violet Allen Hill wrote a beautiful story called The Venus Effect. It is free online at Lightspeed. I first read it in John Joseph Adams' Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2017, I think. It was the kind of story that took the top of my head off, and I said, I want to just know like this. So that's what inspired that.
I did not know that. Any other questions?
So Lily, how much is the current politics in this country and China influence your story?
I plead the fifth.
Smart.
It just keeps on being more and more relevant, that story.
And it's the riskiest thing I've ever written. It's always really scary to read it.
No, it's perfect. The line that jumped out at me is, think how your children will benefit leapfrogging into elite university. How could she know?
I don't know. Maybe someone wrote a book called College that actually highlights how legacy admissions work. But
Yeah.
you know.
Donna?
So this is writing by people of color, and so I'm wondering if you had a large number of people to choose from, or how large is this group of writers of color who write speculative or science fiction?
It's huge, it's ginormous, and it keeps expanding. I mean, every once in a while on social media, someone will ask, well, are there any people of color writing science fiction and fantasy? And, you know, at first I was really patient, and I would say, here's a list. But at this point, I'm just like, you're not trying, because it's obvious to me they're everywhere. You know, turn around and you run into one. So there are lists on Wikipedia. There are, anytime I start to list people, I'm sure I'm leaving out half the authors.
Mention your essays. I mean, you have a number of essays.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead
okay.
and mention that.
I should mention that I wrote a thing, but that was just African American. That was not even, that was just, I wrote an essay called Crash Course in the History of Black Science Fiction, and that was, I listed 42 short stories and novels from the 19th century on, and now I'm expanding on that. The most recent one was, I wrote about Matt Johnson's novel, Pym. You were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the lovely things about the last decade or so, I think. So about a decade ago, there was this whole thing on the internet called Race Veil.
Race Veil.
Yes, where various people said various things. They failed. And as a response to that, a community of fans of color, writers of color, critics of color started coming together in conversation. And that has led to just greater awareness of what's going on, of the opportunity to build community with each other, read each other's work, critique each other's work, argue about each other's work. And that has just been a wonderful thing. You need a lot of good horseshit to grow good vegetables and flowers. So that's kind of how I feel about Race Veil and what happened after. Like, the bounty has been amazing, and it's only becoming more so. Yeah.
I will just add that both of these authors and I myself were all graduates of Clarion West, and I had a sort of an aha moment at a conference down in Florida where someone asked me to name South Asian writers of science fiction, and other than two names, there were two names that everyone supposedly knew, which were Anil, Menon, and Vandana Singh. And I said, well, let's see, there's Usman Malik, there's Nibidita Sen, there's I said Indrapramit Das, and I just kept going, and then I thought, oh, wait a second, these are all people that went to Clarion West. So I have been castigated by at least one reviewer for highlighting graduates of Clarion West, but damn, Clarion West is actually doing something about getting writers of color in this field noticed and out there. Yeah. Long answer, sorry.
What was your biggest challenge in being editor for the anthology? Could you elaborate on that?
The biggest challenge for me was having to say no to some people. The first challenge was being told that I couldn't pay them the going rate for stories, which led to, after some careful diplomacy, which led to a smaller book than I would have liked. Cut down the number of words, and then the rate per word goes up. So, but then that led to sorry, I can't do this. Sorry, this, no, too many stories about people tearing out their hearts. Sorry, just can't have that.
How many stories?
3. Yeah, so that was the biggest challenge, was turning people down.
And for the lower than usual rate, what do you think drove that?
Sorry?
May I ask? So you said there was 2 challenges, turning people down and then having to say that you're paying lower than usual for story.
Oh, well, it started out, the proposal that I was given was that I would be paying people under market rate, which, no, that's not what happened.
Yeah, so I guess it's but why do you think that was an initial proposal? We're trying to do this anthology of speculative fiction written by people of color. So what do you think drove, we'll pay it under market rate? Like, do you think?
I think that was the budget that the publisher had, and I think they didn't realize how awful it looked, and until I explained it to them. But they quickly realized, oh yeah, no, we don't actually want to pay less for people of color than for people of pallor.
Yeah, let's go viral on social media with that.
Yeah.
See how that plays.
So Alberto, what are you working on now?
Let's see. Well, I've got a novel that I'm working on where, let's see, I am taking a look at what the expectations of gender roles do to a society. I'm doing a take on the classic gender switch of the politics and how that plays out. And that, of course, if you're going to do it logically, means that you have to start thinking about how the entire world works. And you are suddenly, it was going to be a short story, then it became a novelette, then a novella, and then it's now a novel because, unintended consequences, just like life. So I'm working on that. And a variety of short stories. And yeah.
Same question?
What, me?
Yeah, what are you working on?
It's not a batteries.
Yeah, I think I'll use this one.
Juice.
Yeah, we'll all use this one then. Well, I'm working on revisions for a middle grade novel called Speculation that is about two young African-American girls in the 1960s who go to live with their grandparents, and one of them breaks the other's glasses, so she winds up wearing her great aunt's glasses and sees ghosts and stuff through them. So there's that, and and a sequel to Everfair.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to be what people expect.
That's good.
I have a novel about asylum seekers in Australia, currently on submission. I actually just turned in revisions to my agent at 3 p.m. today. I'm tired. I owe Slate a short story in 2 weeks, and I owe another editor a short story. I look forward to when they're all done.
So, really, if I'm wrong, would this be your first novel?
First published, I've thrown out 2.
Yeah, okay, but first one.
Yes?
And what are each of you reading now? Let me know if that question was already asked.
No, I don't think anyone's asked that yet. I just finished rereading Pym because I had to write about it. And probably the next thing I'm going to read is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. But it's kind of a fight between that and I just got a copy of the 3rd book in Lara Elena Donnelly's series.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're reading which one?
Amnesty.
Okay, so you're reading the 3rd one?
Yeah,
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I hate you. Amberlow, Armistice, and then
Amnesty.
Amnesty. Yeah, that's the 3rd one. And damn, I want to read that, but yeah.
I'm almost done with Anne Duke's Thinking in Bets, and I finished, I think, White Fragility in 1 day last week, so that was fun.
You read fast. Yeah.
What's your most distracting procrastination and how do you fight it?
Petting my cat, and I don't. Yeah.
Don't fight that.
So I work nights, I'm a nurse, and so I'm just going to say sleep. Lily.
I feel like I am dropping a nuclear bomb of some kind by saying this, but I recently discovered a mobile game called Lily's Garden, which reads in 2 to the fantasy of owning your own piece of property with a garden and growing vegetables and plants, which apparently is the common thread through all the games that I wind up wasting dozens and dozens of hours on, including Stardew Valley. So I should probably get a garden. In the meantime, I'm playing that.
To eat the vegetables.
Yeah.
We're done? Oh, yeah, signing, okay,
Yeah,
sure.
we could do that.
Thank you guys.